Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. Let's go back and look now at lack of self-control a bit more carefully. So a person has desire, and they also have intellect or reason working. And there's some sort of interference between the two of them. So how many different ways can this play itself out? It's worth thinking about this because then you can recognize this a little bit more easily when it occurs. And Aristotle gives you a kind of typography, you might say, of different ways in which we can be intemperate or lack self-control. Literally lacking self-mastery. So what are we usually intemperate with? Aristotle says that the main thing has to do with desires for physical pleasure. And that makes good sense. I mean, think about times where you set your alarm for 6 in the morning. And why did you set your alarm for 6 in the morning? Because you didn't get all the work that you needed to get done, and you wanted to get up and study. You had a really good intention. And you said to yourself, this is the right thing for me to do. And you went to bed maybe around 11 or 12, right? So you're already cutting it a little bit close, and you'll have class at, say, 10 o'clock, right? So you're going to get up at 6 in the morning, you're going to really buckle down and study, and you're going to be so prepped for class, and you're getting so much out of it. And then 6 o'clock comes around, and the alarm goes off, and what do? Yeah, almost everybody, I know, hits the snooze button at least once. How many times is okay to hit the snooze button, do you think?
Depending on how much work.
How much work you have? Yeah, Aristotle would probably say, why don't you set the alarm for when you actually think you'll get up, instead of, playing the snooze button tag game. But, maybe it's better if you get up after 1 snooze than 5 snoozes. I know some people who can, hit the snooze button for an hour. Some even longer than that. Now, what's going on there? Reason is telling them something. It's time to get up. Remember, we said we were going to do this. This is a good thing to do. But they don't really feel like it, right? What do they feel like doing? It's nice to lay in bed. And it feels good to sleep, doesn't it? Sometimes, especially if it's a cold day. What about other things? What are other things we have physical pleasure in that we can have a lack of self-control? Yeah.
Eating.
Yeah, food for one thing. How many servings should we have? I mean, if it tastes really good, maybe it's okay to have seconds, but maybe not thirds. Maybe it has to do with how many times we eat or things like that. And again, if you have a lack of self-control and you're not yet vicious, something in you tells you, hey, this is enough for you. But then your desire says, go and have another. Think about pizza, right? Pizza comes, and you've ordered a pizza, and you may as well order the large because if you're going to spend the money on it, you get a better cost for the large pizza than you do the medium pizza. And so you have a slice, and that's good. That's probably enough. One big large slice of pizza is probably all you need. And then you say, I'm going to put the rest away, and I'll have some tomorrow. And then hour passes, and you're like, I can go for another piece of pizza. And you think about it, you say, I probably shouldn't. But then desire comes along and says, have another piece. And then maybe, you eat half the pizza. Or who knows? What else? So food, sleep, drinking, not necessarily alcohol too. You could have a lack of self-control with respect to coffee or tea or soda, really anything that you like drinking. What else? What are other physical pleasures that you could?
Drugs. Drugs,
yeah. People take drugs because they make them feel good, right?
Sex.
Yep, sexual activity, one of our strongest desires. That can get you in all sorts of trouble. I mean, think about the many different ways in which reason tells us this is not a good idea. And then somebody goes along and does it anyway. I mean, that's what movies are made of, many movies. Aristotle doesn't have quite as big of a range of things that he discusses because we've discovered a lot of new ways to appeal to our senses. People get addicted to shopping, I suppose in some ways, if it's just a matter of, it's not yet become like, here's my mindset and this is the way it ought to be, but if somebody's hoarding and they think to themselves, this isn't right, I probably shouldn't be doing this, but they find themselves doing it anyway, that might be a type of lack of self-control as well. Aristotle says there's a few other things that also fit into this. Anger is another big one. Think about how difficult it is once you're actually angry to keep things in check. Do you ever have the sense as you're arguing with somebody or something's going on that you're actually like starting to cross a line? You probably shouldn't say this, but you kind of feel like saying it. It's not really true, but it's true enough for the circumstances that you're going to call them that name. Well, that would be anger, leading to a lack of self-control. Reason is actually still telling you, this is not a good idea, but you end up following anger. And anger actually has its own kind of reasoning process, Aristotle says. Anger is like a hasty servant who hears part of the instructions and then goes rushing off to try to do them. Anger hears something that tells the person that, hey, I'm being treated badly, and then says, I should get revenge. And it just rushes off to do it. There's other good things. Pleasures are good. Sometimes it's right to be angry. There's other things that Aristotle says we can be acratic or have a lack of self-control with. And these are things like wealth, victory, honor, and he even talks about children and parents. That's an interesting one, because he never actually talks about that in other places. Do people sometimes do things, or are they tempted to do things to make money that they know are wrong, but they find themselves overcome by the amount of money? And they still know it's wrong. They feel bad while they're doing it, but they do it. This is what Japanese game shows are made of, right? Would you hit a complete stranger with a hammer if I paid you $1 million? Kind of tempting, wouldn't it? I mean, if you have no temptation about that whatsoever and you reject that immediately and say, that would be completely wrong and that actually disgusts me, you're probably virtuous. If you actually say to yourself, I'm kind of tempted, but that would be the wrong thing to do, get away from me, then you have self-control. If, on the other hand, you say,
yeah, give me the hammer.
That sounds like a bad thing, but yeah, okay, I'll do it. Then you lack self-control. If you say, sign me up, this sounds like a great idea, then you're probably vicious. You see how the range works? So you can be motivated to do things by a desire for wealth. Other people, it's honor or fame or celebrity. If you put a camera on people, can you get people to do crazy things that they ordinarily would see as a bad idea? Again, this is what game shows are made of, and reality shows, and a lot of other kinds of shows as well. People will do a lot of things to appear certain ways in other people's eyes. Victory. Aristotle talks about this thing that he calls philonikeia. Nike is the Greek word for victory. Another word that we could translate by it is being right or winning. A love of winning, a love of passing other people up, a love of being at the top, a love of shutting other people up and being the one who's in the right. Does that ever lead us to cross lines? You know, where we know that we're doing the wrong thing, but we say, well, in this case, I'm going to do that. And it doesn't always have to be in arguments or contests. I had something like this, not quite so bad anymore, thankfully, but with driving. None of you like to pass other people? You enjoy it? Why do you like to pass other people? What are you getting out of it? You're getting there quicker, right? That's what you tell yourself. But really, why do you like to pass other people? Because you're putting them behind you. You're not actually getting there any quicker, but you've passed them and it feels like an achievement, doesn't it? And if somebody else passes you, do you like that? Who's that jerk? Sometimes you'll chase them. I don't do this sort of thing anymore, thank God. But sometimes you'll chase them and then pass them, you know. Well, that would be what Aristotle calls desire for victory. And that can lead us to lack of self-control. What about children and parents? This is a really interesting one. You ought to, Aristotle thinks, love your children. You ought to love your parents. You ought to do a lot of things for them. But can you become too preoccupied with them and end up going over the line, so to speak, and doing things that you shouldn't do out of love or desire to help them out?
Toddlers and Tiaras.
Oh, yeah, those shows are a good example. You look at those parents and you know, you listen to their justifications and you're like, I'm not really sure about that. I think there might be a little bit of excessiveness to this. Yeah, toddlers to tiaras, all these beauty shows. Any other things along those lines that you can think of offhand? Yeah.
Well, like the overprotective parent.
The helicopter parent. Yeah. Now, why? What is the good that that's interfering with?
Well, children, like especially when they're toddlers, they need like free unstructured play in order to develop like a sense of self.
Yeah.
So if the parent becomes too intrusive, then the toddler can never develop that sense of self. It becomes too dependent on the parent, and if they don't develop their self, they become too egotistical, and it theoretically leads to sociopaths.
Or borderline personality disorder. Right. Yeah. What about the helicopter parent in college? When you see, because you've seen some, right?
I mean, there's
what's
like the shows. There's one show. It's Jersey Housewives. Not Jersey Housewives. I think it's New York Housewives, where her son's at college and she randomly shows up and knocks on his door with like a case of beer and like tries to start partying with his friends.
Okay, that's a different kind of helicopter parent. That's not the one who's like I'm going to make sure that my child gets good grades.
But it's still too much love, like too much.
Yeah, it's a kind of indulgence, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what good does that interfere with? That interferes with the child's development. If it's the other kind of helicopter parent who calls up the teacher and I don't understand why my son or daughter is not doing so well in your class, and first you have to say I can't tell you anything because of FERPA, and then sometimes they'll like browbeat their child into waiving their FERPA rights, and then you start talking with the parent, and the parent will have all sorts of plans for their kid and what their kid is going to do. Who should actually be talking to the professor? The student, right? Why? It's their responsibility. Why else is it important? What's that?
It's our life.
It's it's part of autonomy. Somebody else said something over here that's a.
Is it independence?
Yeah, in order to become an independent, autonomous person, you actually have to stand up for yourself, engage in discussions by yourself, learn how to talk to professors, store managers, who else would you need to talk to, bosses, all these people on your own. And if you don't, something's going to go bad. So the parent who is the helicopter parent who recognizes that there's something wrong with this, but actually says, I'm still going to do this, they would have a lack of self-control. Over here on this side, this is the last thing I'm going to say about this, Aristotle actually distinguishes a few different ways in which things are going bad here. And he talks about it in terms of knowledge. The person who has a lack of self-control does have knowledge of what's right and wrong. They have general knowledge about it. They may also have, specific knowledge about, in this circumstance, this is what's required. Are they using their knowledge? That's the question. They're not actually using their knowledge. They're like somebody who is, he says, drunk or asleep. They actually know things, but they're not using it at that time. It's being sort of disengaged. And instead, what's happening, if knowledge isn't running the show, then desire is going to run the show. So something has to make you go one way or the other. So for Aristotle, if it's not your intellect, or your intellect in line with right desire, then it's going to be your other desires, and they will, run the show. And then if you keep on doing it, eventually this part will go away. It'll become corrupted, and then the risk is going from lack of self-control to vice. Aristotle thinks that most people are kind of in between lack of self-control and self-control. And it's up to us which way we go. You guys are at a particular point in your life where you have a lot of control over this. By the time that you get to my age, you have much less control over it, but you still have some control over it.